There I was, standing in the middle of my driveway under the blistering July sun, gripping a 3-pound zucchino rampicante like a baseball bat. My knuckles were white. Sweat was dripping down my nose, stinging my eyes, but I didn't blink. I couldn't blink. If I blinked, I might actually lose my mind and do something that would land me on the 6 o'clock news. Across the pavement, standing safely on her pristine, chemically scorched beige lawn, was Linda Higgins. She was wearing a floral blouse that looked like it had been upholstered onto her body and wielding a clipboard like a shield. "It is an eyesore, Jack!" she shrieked, her voice hitting that frequency usually reserved for dog whistles and failing car brakes. "It is a violation of the aesthetic integrity of Oakbridge Estates. Section 4, paragraph B, clearly states that no agricultural plots shall be visible from the street, or, and this is the new part, Jack, so listen up, from the second-story window of any adjacent property." I looked at the zucchini in my hand. It was beautiful. It was a curved, pale green masterpiece I had grown from a seed I imported from Italy. It tasted like butter and victory, and she wanted to kill it. "Linda," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "my garden is in the backyard. It is behind a 6-foot cedar fence. The only way you can see my tomatoes is if you are actively pressing your face against the glass of your guest bedroom window like a gargoyle." She puffed up, looking like an angry parakeet. "I have a right to a view, and my view is currently being polluted by foliage. It looks like a jungle back there. It's bringing down property values. I had the board vote on it last night. You have 72 hours to return the land to sod, or we will fine you $500 a day and hire a crew to remove it at your expense." She slapped a piece of paper onto my mailbox. She didn't even hand it to me. She just slapped it there like she was tagging a rhino, and marched back into her house. The door slammed. I stood there, holding my zucchini, listening to the buzzing of cicadas and the sound of my own blood pressure redlining. This wasn't just a garden. This was my sanctuary. I work in logistics. My life is spreadsheets, delayed shipments, angry emails, and meetings that could have been texts. When I come home, I don't want to watch TV. I want to put my hands in the dirt. I want to grow things. I had spent 3 years cultivating that soil. I had heirloom tomatoes that dated back to the 1800s. I had peppers that were so hot they required a permit in 3 states. I had squash that looked like alien artifacts. And unlike Linda's lawn, which was a radioactive shade of green thanks to the gallons of chemicals she dumped on it, my yard was alive. Bees, butterflies, life. I walked into my house, tossed the citation on the kitchen island, and cracked a beer. My hands were shaking. I read the paper. It was official. The Emergency Bylaw Amendment regarding unsanctioned agriculture. They had passed it in a closed session. Of course they did. Linda was the HOA president, treasurer, and secretary. She was the Kim Jong-un of the cul-de-sac. I went out to the backyard to survey the damage. It was immaculate. I'm an engineer by trade. My rows were laser straight. The raised beds were made of hand-stained cedar. There wasn't a weed in sight. It looked better than the terrifyingly uniform hydrangeas the HOA planted at the entrance. But that didn't matter. In the world of the Homeowners Association, logic is the first casualty. The clock was ticking, 72 hours. I sat on my patio, staring at my trellised cucumbers, and felt a cold pit of dread in my stomach. I could fight it in court, sure, but that would take months and thousands of dollars. By the time a judge looked at the case, Linda would have already sent in the bulldozers. They had the right to cure violations on private property if the homeowner refused. It was basically legalized trespassing. I took a bite of the raw zucchini. It was delicious. It crunched loudly in the silence of the afternoon. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let Linda and her beige brigade destroy my sanctuary. But I didn't know how to stop them. Not yet. I needed help. I needed someone who understood Earth moving, someone who wasn't afraid of a middle-aged woman with a clipboard. I needed a contractor. The next morning I called in sick. I couldn't focus on supply chains when my own supply chain was under siege. I spent 2 hours on the phone, calling every landscaping and excavation company in the county. Most of them laughed when I said I needed a rush job to move a garden. They were booked out until October. Finally, I got a hold of a guy named Tony. His company was called Tony's Dirt and Stone. No website, no Facebook page, just a number on the side of a truck I'd seen parked at the gas station. "Yeah, I can swing by," Tony said. His voice sounded like he gargled with gravel. "I'm finishing up a pool dig. Be there in 20. 20 minutes later, a Ford F-350 that looked like it had been through a demolition derby roared into my driveway. It was the size of a tank. A man stepped out who matched the truck perfectly. Tony was 6'4", easily 300 pounds, with forearms the size of my thighs and a beard that contained multitudes. He was wearing a neon yellow shirt that was straining against the laws of physics. He walked into the backyard, took one look at my garden, and let out a low whistle. "Nice setup," he said. He reached out and touched a tomato plant with surprising gentleness. "Cherokee purple?" "Yeah," I said, surprised. "You garden?" "My nonna grows everything," Tony grunted. "She'd kill a man for a tomato like this. So what's the problem? You want to expand?" "I wish," I sighed. "The HOA. They passed a new rule. They want it gone in 48 hours. I need a quote to— God, it hurts to say this. To dig up the beds and move the soil. Maybe put it in pots or something." Tony's face darkened. He spat on the ground. "Hoe," he said the word like it was a curse. "I hate those parasites. They tried to find me for parking my work truck in my own driveway. I told them if they touched my truck, I'd park it in their living room." He walked around the perimeter of the garden, kicking the dirt with his steel-toed boots. He was shaking his head. "To move this? It's gonna be a mess, Jack. You got irrigation lines, you got deep roots. You move these plants now, in this heat, they're gonna go into shock. Half of them will die." "I know," I said, feeling the anger bubbling up again. "But if I don't, they're going to bulldoze it." Tony stopped near the back corner of the yard, right near the property line where an old oak tree stood. He was looking down at something in the grass. He kicked at it, then crouched down. "What's this?" he asked. I walked over. Sticking out of the ground, barely visible beneath the mulch, was a rusted piece of iron. It looked like an old T-post, the kind you use for fencing. "I don't know," I said. "It was there when I bought the place. I tried to pull it out once, but it sunk deep." Tony grabbed it with one massive hand and gave it a tug. It didn't budge. He brushed away some of the dirt around the base. The metal was pitted and ancient. "This ain't just a fence post," Tony said, squinting. "See this notch? And the way it's angled? This is old school. My grandpa used to use these. This is 1940s steel. You know what used to be here before the subdivision?" "Farmland, I think," I said. "Yeah, but look at the layout," Tony said, standing up and gesturing with his meaty hands. "That oak tree is old, 80, 90 years. This post fits a grid. I bet you anything this wasn't just a farm. This was a domestic plot. Back in the war, everyone had them." "The war?" "World War II, Tony said. "Victory gardens. My nonna still talks about hers. It was a patriotic duty. You grow your own food so the commercial crops can go to the troops. It was a big deal. Government protected them and everything." He looked at me, a mischievous glint in his eye. "You know, if you could prove this was a historical site, they couldn't touch it." I stared at him. The gears in my head, usually reserved for optimizing freight routes, started spinning wildly. "A historical site?" "I'm just saying," Tony shrugged. I had a job last year, couldn't dig a pool because we found an old arrowhead. Had to shut down for 3 months for the archaeologists. Bureaucracy cuts both ways, boss. He slapped me on the shoulder, nearly dislocating it. I can quote you for the removal, but it'll cost you $3 grand and your soul. Or, you can find out what this rusty spike is all about. I looked at the rusted metal. Then I looked at my tomatoes. Then I looked at Linda's house, looming over the fence like the eye of Sauron. Tony, I said, don't quote me for the removal yet. I have some research to do. I ran inside and fired up my laptop. I didn't go to work that day. I went to war. I pulled up the county property records. I went back through the deeds. The house was built in 1998, but the land had been owned by a Silas J. Abernathy from 1935 to 1975. I dug deeper. I found a digitized archive of the local town gazette. I searched Abernathy and garden, and there it was, a grainy black and white photo from July 1943. It showed a man in overalls standing proudly next to a massive pumpkin right in front of the oak tree that was currently in my backyard. The caption read, "Local patriot Silas Abernathy, recognized for county's most productive victory garden." "We dig for freedom," says Silas. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't just growing vegetables. I was standing on hallowed agricultural ground. I quickly searched for victory garden laws. Most of them were defunct, obviously. The War Food Administration was dissolved in 1945. But then I found it. A federal proclamation, never technically repealed, that encouraged the preservation of civilian food infrastructure during times of national distress. And then the kicker. A state statute from 1952 regarding heritage landscapes that prohibited HOAs, or neighborhood covenants, as they were called then, from banning activities that honor the historical character of the land. It was thin. It was legally dubious at best. But it was ammunition. I printed the photo, I printed the deed, I printed the statute, and I wasn't going to remove the garden. I was going to rebrand it. I called Tony back. "Tony, bring the truck tomorrow. But we aren't digging anything up. We're building fortifications." "Fortifications?" Tony asked, sounding delighted. "We need sandbags," I said. "We need a flagpole. And do you know where I can get some barbed wire? The plastic kind for safety. But it needs to look real." "Boss," Tony said, "I know a guy who runs a surplus store. I can get you a foxhole if you want it." "Let's start with the sandbags," I said. The next morning, the transformation began. I didn't sleep. I spent the night painting signs. When the sun came up, I was ready. Operation Overlord was a go. I went to the hardware store and bought 6 American flags. Not the little ones you stick in a cupcake, the big ones. The ones that ripple majestically in slow motion. I bought a solar-powered speaker. I bought a scarecrow kit, but instead of dressing it in flannel, I dressed it in a khaki shirt and an old helmet I found at the surplus store Tony recommended. By noon, my backyard didn't look like a vegetable patch anymore. It looked like a forward operating base. Tony arrived with the sandbags. He and 2 of his guys, Silent Mike and a kid named Jojo, started stacking them around the raised beds. It wasn't a wall, it was a revetment. It looked incredibly cool. "This is art," Tony said, wiping sweat from his brow. "This is a statement." I hammered the new sign into the ground, right where Linda could see it from her window. It was hand-painted in bold, military stencil font. "Private First Class Jack's Historical Victory Garden. Este 1943. Restored 2024. Digging for freedom." I set up the speaker and synced it to my phone. I hit play on a playlist I had curated called Patriotic Fury. The Andrews sisters started singing Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy at 70 decibels. I stood back and admired our work. The zucchini were safe behind a wall of sandbags. The tomatoes were guarded by the scarecrow, who I had named Sergeant Pepper. The flags were snapping in the wind. It took exactly 14 minutes for the enemy to engage. I heard the sliding glass door on Linda's deck screech open. I didn't turn around. I just started weeding my carrots, humming along to the music. "Jack!" The scream was louder this time. She was on her balcony, leaning over the railing like she was trying to dive into a pool. "What on God's green earth are you doing?" I turned slowly. I offered a sharp, crisp salute. "Afternoon, ma'am," I shouted over the music. "Just securing the food supply against the axis of tyranny." "Turn that noise down," she yelled. "And what is all that? Garbage, sandbags. Is that a helmet? You've turned your yard into a war zone." "Incorrect," I said, walking closer to the fence so I didn't have to shout, but keeping the music playing. "I have restored this land to its historical purpose. I did some research, Linda. This isn't just a garden. It's a registered Victory Garden site from 1943. I'm honoring the veterans." "You are insane," she sputtered. "You're mocking them. This is tacky. It's offensive. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said, gesturing to the flags. "Call the police on a man waving the stars and stripes and growing food for the community. Tell them you hate history, Linda. Tell them you hate America." Her face went a color of purple that matched my eggplants. "I do not hate America. I hate your zucchini. You have 24 hours left, Jack. I'm bringing the bulldozers tomorrow morning, and I'm going to bill you for every second they are here. You touch one leaf of this lettuce," I said, pointing a trowel at her, "and you'll have to answer to history." She stormed inside. I knew she was calling the cops. I knew it. But I also knew something about the local PD. They were understaffed, overworked, and generally hated dealing with HOA disputes. I texted Tony, who had left for lunch. "She's calling the cops. Stand by." Tony texted back. "I'm eating a meatball sub. If the cops come, tell them I'm the site foreman and I'm union. Confuses them every time." 40 minutes later, a cruiser rolled up. I saw it through the slats in the fence. It was a slow roll, the kind that says, "I really don't want to be here." I walked out to the front driveway. 2 officers stepped out. One was a young rookie who looked like he was 12. The other was an older guy, graying at the temples, looking like he carried the weight of the world on his utility belt. I read his name tag. Miller. "Sir," Officer Miller said, adjusting his belt. "We got a noise complaint and a report of unauthorized construction of a military fortification." He looked tired, so tired. "It's a garden, officer," I said. "A victory garden." "A victory garden," Miller repeated flatly. "Yes, sir. My neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, is threatening to bulldoze my heirloom vegetables. I discovered the land has historical significance from World War II, so I've restored the aesthetic to honor the era." Miller blinked. He looked at the rookie. Then he looked at me. "Can I see it?" "Absolutely," I said. "Follow me." I led them into the backyard. The Andrews sisters had switched to Glenn Miller's In the Mood. The flags were waving. The sandbags were neat. The scarecrow stood vigilant. Miller stopped. He stared at the garden for a long time. He looked at the sign. He looked at the giant zucchini. "Is that a zucchino rampicante?" Miller asked. I paused. Yes, it is." "My dad used to grow those," Miller said. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Hard to get them to curve right without a trellis." "I use a cattle panel arch," I said. Miller nodded appreciatively. Then he looked up at Linda's window. She was there, watching. "So," Miller said, "she wants this gone?" "She says it violates the view from her bedroom. She called it a jungle." Miller looked at the meticulous rows. the weed-free soil, the patriotic bunting. Sir, I'm not a code enforcer. I'm law enforcement. Unless you start firing artillery shells from those sandbags, this is a civil matter. She threatened to bulldoze it tomorrow, I said, without my consent. Miller frowned. He turned to the window where Linda was lurking. He walked over to the fence and looked up. Linda slid the door open immediately. "Officer!" she yelled. "Arrest him! Look at that monstrosity! It's a blight!" "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice projecting clearly without shouting, "I see a well-maintained garden, and I see a lot of American flags. Now, I'm not going to arrest a man for being patriotic on his own property." "It's not patriotic, it's spite!" Linda screamed. "He's doing this to annoy me." "It seems to be working," Miller muttered under his breath. Then, louder, "Ma'am, if you or your HOA damage this man's property without a court order, that's criminal mischief. And if you call 911 again because someone is playing jazz music at 2 p.m., I'm going to cite you for misuse of emergency services. Have a nice day." He turned back to me. "Keep the volume down a bit, huh? And nice squash." "Thank you, officer," I said. They left. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had won the skirmish. But the war was just starting. Linda wasn't going to stop because a cop told her to. She was going to escalate. She was going to bring in the heavy machinery. I needed to fortify. I called Tony. "Tony," I said, "the cops are on our side. But she's coming tomorrow with a crew. I need you to block the driveway." "Block it?" Tony asked. "I need a physical barrier," I said. "Can you park the dump truck across the access point?" "Boss," Tony said, "for you, I'll park it sideways. And I'll bring the boys. We'll have a safety meeting right in the middle of the driveway. Nobody gets past." The sun went down. I didn't sleep. I sat on my back porch, guarding my tomatoes like they were the crown jewels. The air was thick with humidity and impending doom. I could see the blue light of Linda's TV flickering next door. She was probably plotting. Maybe she was hiring mercenaries. Morning came too fast. At 7 a.m., the sound of heavy diesel engines shattered the peace of the cul-de-sac. I ran to the front window. A flatbed truck with a skid-steer loader was idling in the street. On the side of the door, it said, "Precision Landscapes." Linda was already out there, pointing at my house, directing them like a traffic cop from hell. But then another sound joined the chorus, a deeper, throatier roar. Tony's massive dump truck swung around the corner. He backed it up right into my driveway, blocking the entire entrance to the backyard. He hopped out, wearing his neon vest and holding a clipboard. Silent Mike and Jojo hopped out of the passenger side, carrying coffees and looking menacing. I walked out to meet them. The guy from Precision Landscapes, a skinny dude with a goatee, looked confused. He walked up to Tony. "Hey buddy, you're blocking the job," Goatee said. Tony looked down at him. Tony was eating a breakfast burrito the size of a forearm. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and swallowed. "This is an active historical restoration site," Tony rumbled. "OSHA regulations. No unauthorized heavy machinery within 50 feet of the perimeter." "What?" Goatee asked. "Lady said we're here to clear a garden." "Lady is mistaken," I chimed in, stepping forward. I was wearing my own neon vest now. I looked official. "This is a federally recognized victory garden. You run a dozer through here. You're destroying heritage artifacts. You got liability insurance for that?" Goatee looked at Linda, who was marching over, her face a mask of fury. "Don't listen to them!" she shrieked. "They are lying! Move that truck!" Tony crossed his arms. His biceps bulged. "I ain't moving nothing until my safety inspection is complete. Takes about 8 hours." "You are fired!" Linda yelled at Tony. "I didn't hire you." "I know," Tony grinned. "He did," he pointed at me. "And I got a contract. Possession is 9/10 of the law, lady, and I possess the driveway." Goatee looked at Tony, then at the frantic woman. then at his own skid steer. "Look, lady," he said, "I didn't sign up for a turf war. Call me when the driveway is clear." He climbed back into his truck. "No, come back!" Linda screamed, chasing the truck as it drove away. "You have a contract." She turned to us, panting, her hair coming undone. She looked deranged. "You think you're funny, Jack? You think this is over? I have the board. I have the lawyers. I am going to bury you in fines. I will take your house." "You can try," I said. "But you're going to have to get through the troops first." I pointed to the street. A minivan had just pulled up. It wasn't a contractor. It was an old Dodge Caravan with a bumper sticker that said "Proud Vietnam Vet." The side door slid open, and an elderly man with a cane and a VFW hat struggled out. Then another. Then another. I hadn't just relied on Tony. I had made a call the night before to the local VFW post. I told them a crazy lady was trying to destroy a garden dedicated to World War II veterans. I told them there would be free vegetables and coffee. Commander Rick, the guy with the cane, hobbled up the driveway. He looked at Linda, then at the flags, then at me. "Son," Rick rasped, "is this the lady who hates the troops?" I looked at Linda. Her jaw dropped. I don't hate the troops," she stammered. "Then why are you trying to destroy a victory garden?" Rick asked, thumping his cane on the pavement. "My daddy fed a family of 6 with a garden like this in a 43. You got a problem with fresh produce, ma'am?" Linda looked at the 3 old veterans, then at Big Tony, then at me. She let out a sound of pure frustration, a strangled scream, and turned on her heel. "You'll hear from our attorney," she yelled over her shoulder. "We'll be here," I shouted back. "Coffee's in the back, gentlemen," I told the vets, "and help yourself to the peppers." "Ooh, peppers," Rick said, his mood instantly brightening. "You got any jalapenos?" "Ghost peppers," I said. "Even better." We had won the battle. But Linda was right about one thing. The lawyers were coming, and HOAs have deep pockets. I knew the next phase wasn't going to be fought with sandbags and scarecrows. It was going to be fought with paper. I needed to escalate the narrative. I needed the court of public opinion. I went inside and pulled up the video I had taken on my phone. The one where Linda screamed, "I don't care about veterans, I care about property values." I opened TikTok. I typed a caption, "HOA president tries to bulldoze What 2 Memorial Garden because it ruins her view. #Karen, #HOA, #veterans, #victory garden." I hit post. By the time the sun went down, the video had 50,000 views. By the time I woke up the next morning, it had 2 million. The comments were a waterfall of rage. "Does she know who won the war?" "Protect the zucchini at all costs." "Where is this? I just want to talk." I was reading the comments, sipping my coffee, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Jack?" a crisp voice asked. "This is Sarah from Channel 5 News. We saw your TikTok. We'd love to come out and do a segment. Are you available?" I looked out the window. Big Tony was sleeping in a lawn chair next to the sandbags. Commander Rick was watering the tomatoes. "Yes," I said, "I'm available. But bring a helmet. It's a war zone out here." The news crew arrived at noon. It was a circus. The reporter, a guy with perfect hair and a somber expression, stood in front of my fortifications. "I'm here in Oakbridge Estates," he said into the camera, "where a local man's tribute to the greatest generation has sparked a neighborhood civil war. Is it a garden, or is it a symbol of freedom under fire?" They interviewed me. I played the part perfectly. I didn't smile. I looked solemn. I held a basket of vegetables like it was an orphan I had rescued from a burning building. "I just wanted to honor the history of the land," I told the camera, my voice trembling slightly. "Fake, totally fake. My grandfather served. And when I found out this land was a victory garden, I felt a calling, and to have Mrs. Higgins threaten to bulldoze it, It just breaks my heart." Then they tried to interview Linda. She made the mistake of opening her door. She looked haggard. She shouted, "It's a zoning violation, he's crazy," before slamming the door. It was perfect. She looked like a villain from a Disney movie. The segment aired that night. The next day, things got weird. People started driving by, strangers. They would slow down, take pictures, and honk. Some people threw bags of fertilizer onto the lawn as gifts. One guy left a tray of seedlings. It was becoming a pilgrimage site. But the HOA wasn't backing down. 2 days later, a courier served me with a thick envelope. It was a lawsuit. Oakbridge Estates HOA versus Jack Miller. They weren't just asking for the garden to be removed. They were suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress upon Mrs. Higgins, defamation for the TikTok video, and seeking an emergency injunction to foreclose on my home to pay the accumulating fines, which now totaled $15,000. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the legal jargon. My stomach churned. This was real. They could actually take my house. I could lose everything over a zucchini. I called the only lawyer I knew, my cousin Vinny. Yes, really. He did corporate contracts, not litigation, but he looked at the papers. "Jack," Vinny said over the phone, "they're playing hardball. This Victory Garden defense, it's cute, but in court, it's shaky. The judge might see it as a nuisance. You need to verify the historical status properly or find a loophole in their own bylaws." "I checked the bylaws," I said. "They're ironclad. Linda wrote them." "There's always a loophole," Vinny said. "Send me the full HOA covenants, the original ones, not the ones Linda amended." I dug them out of my file cabinet. I scanned them and sent them over. While Vinny read, I went outside. The stress was eating me alive. I needed to do something with my hands. I started harvesting. The conflict seemed to have acted like Miracle-Gro. The plants were producing at an insane rate. I had bushels of tomatoes. "Hey!" a voice called out. I looked up. It was Officer Miller. He was off duty, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He was leaning on my fence. "Everything all right?" he asked. "They sued me," I said, tossing a rotten tomato into the compost bin. "They want to foreclose." Miller grimaced. "Nasty business. Linda's on a warpath. She called the station 5 times today demanding we arrest the trespassers, meaning the vets." "They're my guests," I said. "I know," Miller said. "That's what I told her. Look, Jack, be careful. The city inspector is coming tomorrow. Linda called code enforcement. If they find a code violation, structural, electrical, anything, the HOA can use that to bypass the court and force immediate removal." "Code enforcement?" I asked. "Yeah, a guy named Bob. He's strict. If that shed is 1 inch too close to the property line, or if those sandbags are retaining water improperly, he'll tag you." I looked at my fortifications. The shed was definitely close to the line. The sandbags were, well, they were sandbags. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "Good luck," Miller said. "My wife saw the news. She's rooting for you." I went into panic mode. I called Tony. "Tony, we have an inspection tomorrow. City code. We need to make sure this place is bulletproof." "City code?" Tony whistled. "Okay, that shed. Is it permitted?" "No, it's a garden shed under 150 square feet. Usually the limit is 120, Tony said. I froze. I grabbed a tape measure. I measured the shed. 10 by 14, 140 square feet. "Crap," I said. "It's 140. "That's a demolition order waiting to happen," Tony said. "We gotta shrink the shed." "Shrink it? By tomorrow?" "No," Tony said. "We gotta make it not a shed." "What does that mean?" "If it has a floor and 4 walls, it's a structure," Tony explained. "If it has 3 walls and no floor, it's a landscape feature or a gazebo. The code is different for gazebos." "You want me to cut a wall off my shed?" Do you want to lose the war, Jack? We spent the night modifying the shed. We took the door off. We removed the back paneling and replaced it with trellis. We ripped up the plywood floor so it was just dirt inside. It was no longer a shed. It was now a rustic open-air pavilion. At 9 a.m. sharp, Bob the inspector arrived. He was a small man with a clipboard that seemed attached to his body surgically. He wore a short-sleeved dress shirt and a tie that was too short. Linda was trailing behind him, looking smug. "That's it," she pointed. "That illegal structure, and the drainage issues caused by those sandbags." Bob walked up to the pavilion. He measured it. He frowned. He walked around it. He tapped the trellis. "It has no floor," Bob noted. "It's a gazebo, sir," I said, "for contemplating the vegetables." Bob looked at his code book. Gazebos under 150 square feet are exempt from permitting if they are not enclosed. He looked at Linda. "It's not a shed, ma'am. It's open air." Linda turned red. "But the sandbags! They are retaining walls." Bob walked over to the sandbags. He poked one. "Are these cemented?" "No, sir," Tony said, stepping out from behind a bush. "Dry stack, gravity held. Temporary landscaping." Bob nodded. "Temporary landscaping does not require a permit." Linda was vibrating with rage. "This is ridiculous! He has electrical! Look, the speaker!" Bob looked at the speaker. He followed the wire. It went to a small solar panel stake in the ground. "Low-voltage solar," Bob droned. "Exempt." He turned to Linda. "Ma'am, there are no violations here." "Are you blind?" she screamed. "Look at it. It's ugly." "Ugly isn't in the code book," Bob said, closing his binder. "However—" He paused. My heart stopped. "Ma'am," Bob said to Linda, "while I'm here, I noticed your gutter downspouts are directed onto this property. That is a violation of Stormwater Management Ordinance 22B. You are discharging runoff onto a neighbor's land." I looked at the corner of her house. Sure enough, her spout was pointed right at my peppers. "What?" Linda stammered. "I'm going to have to write you a citation," Bob said, pulling out a pen. "You have 7 days to rectify, or it's a $50 a day fine." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Tony had to turn around and pretend to cough. Linda looked like she was going to have a stroke. She snatched the ticket from Bob and marched back to her house. "Thank you, Bob," I said. "Just doing my job," Bob said. He looked at the zucchini. "That's a nice squash. My mother makes a bread with those." "Take it," I said, handing him the 3-pound weapon. "Please, it's on the house." Bob took the zucchini. He actually smiled. We had survived the inspection, but the lawsuit was still looming, and the HOA meeting was tonight. This was the climax, the monthly meeting. Linda had scheduled a vote to authorize foreclosure proceedings against me. It was do or die. I called Vinny. "Did you find anything in the bylaws?" "Jack," Vinny said, his voice excited. "I found something. It's beautiful. It's stupid, but it's beautiful." "What is it?" "So, the HOA was incorporated in 1998, right?" "Yeah." "And they used the standard Robert's Rules of Order for their meetings?" "Yes, Linda is obsessed with them." "Well," Vinny said, "I was reading the original charter, Section 12, subsection D, regarding quorum and voting rights. It says that for any vote involving the seizure or lien of real property, the vote must be unanimous by the board and—" "And what?" "And," Vinny chuckled, "it says the homeowners present at the meeting may override any board decision regarding property liens by a 2/3 majority vote, provided a quorum of 20% of residents are present." It's a safeguard they put in back in the 90s to prevent the board from going rogue. Linda probably doesn't even know it's there because nobody ever reads the original charter. So I need 2/3 of the neighbors to vote against her? Exactly. And you need enough people there to make a quorum. How many houses in the neighborhood? 50. So you need 10 people to show up, and you need 7 of them to vote with you. Vinny, I said, I can do better than 10. The meeting was at the community center at 7 p.m. I didn't just invite the neighbors. I weaponized the vegetable garden. I spent the afternoon harvesting everything. I made gift baskets, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, herbs. I put a note in each one. Compliments of the Victory Garden. Come to the meeting tonight to save it. Free salsa for all attendees. Big Tony and the VFW guys helped me deliver them. We went door to door. Hi, I'm Jack. Linda wants to take my house because I grew these tomatoes. Please come vote tonight. Most neighbors were terrified of Linda, but they also hated her. She had fined Mrs. Gable for having a bird feeder. She had fined Mr. Henderson for leaving his trash can out for an hour too long. They were tired. They just needed a leader. And they liked free vegetables. At 6:50 p.m., I walked into the community center. Linda was sitting at the head table, looking triumphant. Her 2 cronies, Karen, yes, actually Karen, and Chad, were beside her. The room was usually empty. Maybe 1 or 2 people. Tonight, it was packed. Every chair was taken. People were standing in the back. Big Tony was leaning against the wall, looking like a bouncer. Commander Rick was in the front row wearing his medals. Linda looked nervous. She banged her gavel. "Order!" she shouted. "This meeting is called to order." She glared at the crowd. "I see we have a lot of guests tonight. We will proceed quickly. First item, the ongoing violations at 742 Oak Street." She looked at me. "The board moves to proceed with foreclosure actions to recover unpaid fines totaling $15,000. Second, Chad said weakly. "All in favor?" Linda asked. "Aye," said Karen. "Aye," said Chad. "Aye," said Linda. "The motion carries," Linda said, smiling a shark-like smile. "We will begin the legal process tomorrow." "Point of order," I shouted, standing up. "Sit down, Jack," Linda sneered. "Public comment is at the end." "I'm not making a comment," I said, holding up the papers Vinny had sent me. "I'm invoking Section 12, subsection D of the Charter, the right of community override." The room went silent. Linda frowned. That's not a thing." "It is," I said. "I have the charter right here. Any vote regarding property liens can be overturned by a 2/3 vote of the homeowners present." I looked around the room. "We have 40 homeowners here. That's a quorum." Linda grabbed the bylaws book. She frantically flipped through pages. Her face went pale. She found it. This is archaic," she sputtered. "We never use this." "It's the law, Linda," I said. "I motion to override the board's decision and to dismiss all fines against my property." "I second," shouted Mrs. Gable from the 3rd row. "I third it," yelled Mr. Henderson. "You can't do this," Linda shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "I am the president. I decide what is aesthetically pleasing. We are not going to turn this neighborhood into a farm." "It's not a farm," I said, walking to the front. "It's a community. You've spent years measuring our grass with a ruler and fining us for living our lives. You forgot that an HOA is supposed to work for us, not against us." I turned to the room. "All in favor of dismissing the fines and protecting the Victory Garden?" Every hand went up. Even the guy Linda was sleeping with raised his hand. He really liked my salsa. "All opposed?" Silence. "The motion carries," I said. "The fines are gone." The room erupted in applause. Commander Rick thumped his cane. Big Tony whistled, but I wasn't done. "One more motion," I said, raising my voice over the cheering. The room quieted down. I motioned to remove the current board president due to loss of confidence and harassment of veterans. Linda gasped, "You can't!" "I second!" shouted everyone in unison. We took a vote. It was a landslide. Linda Higgins was impeached. She gathered her papers, her face a mask of shock and tears, and ran out of the room. "Who do we want for president?" someone yelled. The crowd turned to me. "Oh no," I said, backing up. No, I just want to grow tomatoes." "I nominate Dave!" I shouted, pointing at a chill guy in the back wearing a Hawaiian shirt. "Dave doesn't care about anything." "I accept," Dave said, raising a beer he had snuck in. "First rule, no more inspections." The sun is setting over Oakbridge Estates. The air is cooling down. I'm sitting on my back porch with Big Tony and Commander Rick. We're eating a salad made from the last harvest of the season. The sandbags are still there. The new HOA president, Dave, said they add character. The shed is still a pavilion. Linda put her house on the market a week after the meeting. She couldn't handle the shame. A young couple bought it. They have a dog and they asked me for gardening tips. I looked out at the garden. The Victory Garden sign was weathered now, looking even more authentic. It started as a lie, a desperate, petty lie to save my vegetables. But sitting here, listening to Rick tell stories about his time in the service, and watching Tony sketch out plans for a Victory Koi pond, I realized it wasn't a lie anymore. It really was a victory. "Hey, Jack," Tony said, stabbing a cherry tomato. "You think we can grow pumpkins next year? I know a guy who has seeds for the 1,000-pounders. I smiled. "Tony, if we grow 1,000-pound pumpkins, we're going to need a bigger tractor." "I know a guy," Tony grinned. I took a bite of my salad. It tasted like freedom.